안녕하세요. 여러분의 한국어 선생님 고빌리입니다. Welcome to the fourth part of my analysis series where I take a look at the 8-member group, Stray Kids. If you're seeing me for the very first time, you missed 3 other videos about Stray Kids you probably want to watch. I'm a Korean teacher who's been learning Korean for over 2 decades and teaching it here for 13 years. And in the last video, I took an in-depth look at Changbin. So today I'm going to be introducing you to Hyun-jin.
이게 좀 타이트한 것 같긴 하네.
아, 워낙 마르셔서 괜찮아요. 숨 쉬실 수 있으시죠? 잘 서주시네요.
잘 서주시네.
And I'm going to be analyzing how his Korean sounds overall, such as his voice tone, his pronunciation, any filler words and unique expressions he uses, as well as his handwriting. So unless you speak fluent Korean already, these will be things that you're probably missing out on. But first, I want to give a quick thanks to my Patreon supporters for literally keeping the lights on. I'm just one person who teaches Korean, so if you join my Patreon page, it would really help me to keep giving you more content like this, as well as to keep making my Korean lessons. So please check out my Patreon page at patreon.com/GoBillyKorean. Also, if you're watching this series, you're probably interested in learning Korean, at least a little bit. And if you'd like to be able to watch Stray Kids videos without needing subtitles, I have a whole Korean textbook series called Korean Made Simple, and it's designed for self-study learners. It starts from the very beginning, and it goes all the way up to an intermediate level, which is enough for real Korean conversations. You'll also learn about Korean culture, history, food, and each textbook also comes with audio files for all of the example conversations, which you can listen to hear how Koreans would actually say it, and you can download all of those from my website. So check out the link in the video description to get the very first book and start learning Korean today. And for those of you who've watched all the other 3 videos already, thanks for listening to my ad a 4th time. So now let's get into my full analysis of Hyunjin, whose full Korean name is Hyun-jin.
안녕하세요. Stray Kids hyun-jin이라고 합니다. 반갑습니다. Let's go.
Hyunjin was born in the year 2000 and grew up in the city of Seoul. In Stray Kids, he's the main dancer along with Lino and Felix, and he also raps. And besides just being good at dancing, I noticed that he's a very quick learner.
고개는 어떻게 해요? 돌리.
얘가 넘어가야지 무게중심이 같이 넘어가가지고.
아 이렇게?
이렇게. 오! 나이스!
다시 해봐요.
그렇지. 오! 나을 것 같아. 좋았다. 왔다. 왔다.
Dang.
나이스! 아이고.
I like the subtitles. It says 행복 만두, like happy mandu. But he didn't have an easy debut with Stray Kids. He was actually first casted by SM Entertainment when he was a high school student, and then later switched over to JYP Entertainment where he joined the Stray Kids survival TV show. However, during that show, he was almost eliminated along with Felix, which would have just been terrible, and I'll talk about that a bit in this video as well as why when I get to his Korean. Before all of that though, in high school he was a swimmer, and he still enjoys swimming. He even swam in high school competitions doing the breaststroke, which is exactly like me. I also mainly swam breaststroke on the swim team as well as freestyle, although I certainly didn't look as good as that. Now, before I go into his speech in depth, let's just talk about my first impressions. My first impression of Hyunjin was that he's the toughest, most serious member in the group. Like that kid you knew in high school that would, skip classes to go to the mall, just this really tough, down-to-earth kind of guy. Now, I'm only going to be sharing a few clips from my research again because I don't want this video to get taken down, but here is the first clip that I want to share. And here I just want you to listen to his voice tone, which I'll go over in detail in a bit.
오늘 비록 너가 나를 닭으로 만들었지만 제일 축하해.
that outfit. And here's another clip where he's playing with Lino, and you can see it in his eyes that he's really serious. He's in it to win. So he has this aura of this really tough guy, like I said. But don't let that scare you, or maybe that's actually why you like him. But he's actually quite soft-spoken and lighthearted and surprisingly very humorous, and he does not take himself too seriously.
네. 진짜 바보 같은데? 진짜 바보 같아요. 오늘의 의상 컨셉은 축구고요.
Or here's a clip where Changbin tells him to enjoy his meal. And this is actually one of my favorite clips. Here's what Hyunjin replies to that.
맛있게 먹어라. 현진아.
Or here where they're playing a word game where each person has to say exactly 3 syllables to continue the sentence. And Hyunjin, I guess maybe he didn't know what to say in Korean, so he decides to switch to Japanese.
스테이 사랑해 그리고 너무나 아끼는 복구가 내가 나 되고.
He also seems respectful to me, both how he speaks and he acts. It's like he doesn't want to bother other people or even tease them sometimes, just overall a really polite and respectful guy. Like in this clip, he's supposed to give hugs to the other members as part of a challenge, but he's positive that the moment he does, he's going to get found out since it's not something that he would normally do to them.
아, 근데 어려워요. 저 포옹 진짜 안 하는데. 100% 의심 받습니다.
Okay, those are my first impressions. So then how does Hyunjin speak Korean? Well, let's start with the basics. His voice tone, which is also the most noticeable part of his Korean. And I have a short clip here of that.
신세계 백화점에 가고 있습니다. 신세계 백화점 그래다 제 매장은 또 처음 가보는 장소인데요. 오픈한 지 얼마 안 돼가지고 이제 가서 매체 촬영도 하고 뭐 이것저것 하려고 합니다.
His everyday speaking voice can be a bit soft. In fact, so soft that he also mumbles. Now, he's not the only member of Stray Kids who mumbles. And I'm looking at you, Pangchan, and Lino. And that's already half of the members, and I still have 4 more of these videos to make. But I'd say he does it more than the other members and more consistently, but not always. And anytime you hear him speaking a bit louder, such as anytime he's laughing or anytime he's excited, he doesn't mumble at all. And although his voice still has a deeper tone, he'll sound perfectly clear. And I have an example of that in this clip. He's talking about how he feels really proud of Felix whenever he sees photos of his face around Korea. And I think his voice sounds a little clearer here.
아니 신기해. 나 또 한국에 이렇게 막 돌아다니다가 너 얼굴 붙어있는 간판을 보잖아? 와, 얘 스트레이키즈 우리 팀 아이예요? 막 약간 좀 자랑스러워. 자, 너 덕분에 약간 자부심과 그 자랑스러움이 생겼어.
So overall, his voice sounds low and soft, which if you're studying Korean, I recommend just turning up the volume whenever he's speaking, or at least make sure you're not distracted when you're listening to him to give you the best chance of understanding what he's saying. And I don't know what it is exactly about it, but it's not just one thing, but I really like his voice overall. Like, just listen to how soft it sounds in this next clip from a vlog that he made.
더워라. 날씨는 조금 흐리지만 좋네요. 이렇게 간만에 바다도 보러 오고 제가 옛날에 묵었던 숙소도 다녀오고 밥도 먹고.
I mean, if you look at the music industry, having a unique voice, I think, is one of the most important things as a singer, since so many people out there can sing well, but not everyone will sound unique. And Hyunjin definitely has a more unique voice. And here's another clip where he's speaking a bit louder because he's talking to a guest, but even when his voice is louder, it still will sound soft.
다크 그레이 옷만 한 15켤 생기겠다. 나 귀하고 가지고 또 바로 다크 그레이만 산다고.
But it's not just that his voice is quiet. It also gets quieter over the length of his sentences. And I have a clip to show that. In here, just pay attention to the volume of his voice as his sentences get longer, especially.
한결같은 사람 좋아합니다. 제가 그러지 못해서요. 그 다음이 배울 게 많은 사람. 그 다음이 공감 잘해준 사람. 그 다음이 조언. 조언도 너무 중요한데 저는 그냥 막 조언보다 배울 점이 많은 사람 옆에 있으면 그냥 내가 알아서 터득하게 되는 것 같고.
He starts off with full volume, but as he keeps talking, it gets a little bit quieter and quieter. Now, this sort of thing isn't unique to Hyunjin. And I'd say probably everyone with a soft voice does this same sort of thing where they start out a bit louder and then they go back to their normal volume, especially over long sentences. So my guess is that he's just more comfortable speaking softly at that lower volume than he is speaking loudly. But there's something else about his voice that I think makes it the most unique voice in the entire group, and probably the reason why so many people like his voice, and that is how his voice sounds a bit raspy or husky.
믹스가 뭐 개인적으로 어떤 걸 하오면 제가 항상 믹스한테 야 이거 뭐 어쩌고 저쩌고 예쁜데 뭐 어쩌고 저쩌고 얘기를 한단 말이에요. 그럼 믹스가 엄청 부끄러워요. 막 이런 식으로.
So he has a low voice, he mumbles sometimes, it's a bit quiet, and his voice is also raspy. These 4 things make his voice so unique, but can also make him more difficult to understand if you're a beginner who's learning Korean. And now that you know this though, let's look at a few more clips of all of these things put together.
네. 제가 살다 뭐 이런 것도 해보고 참 여러 경험들을 하는 것 같은데 어쨌든 올해 저한테는 굉장히 또 의미가 큰 해이기도 하고 그런 의미에서 스테이가 또 이렇게 저한테 선물해 주신 거라고 생각합니다. 너무 당황을 해가지고 제가 막 가서 말을 잘 했는지 모르겠지만 아무튼 이렇게 또 값진 상 주셔서 너무너무 감사합니다. 제 방에다 이렇게 오브제처럼 해놓을게요. 감사합니다.
That time the last sentence just went to like a whisper.
그러니까 우리가 만약에 누구 하나 형 동생이었으면 누구 하나 굽히고 들어갔겠지. 근데 이제 동갑이니까. 근데 너가 나를 되게 동경한다고 했잖아. 너무 맛있어. 그 한방 뭔지 알지?
Fortunately though, although he mumbles sometimes, it's not enough that you can't understand what he's saying if you already speak Korean. So he's still pronouncing everything, which is good, and I can't say that about every Korean speaker I've looked at so far since I began making analysis videos.
근데 인트로에 댄스 브레이크가 있었어. 근데 스탠바이를 안 시킨 거야. 근데 스탠바가 노래가 나와. 근데 우리 아직 백스테이지에 있었어.
So this kind of raspy voice, I think, is why my first impression of his speaking was like really tough sounding. But the more that I listened to him, the more his voice started to grow on me, and the more he stands out to me in the group.
투어 때 안 좋았죠. 그 미국 투어 때, 매니아 때. 시작 전에 싸워가지고 무대 하면서 풀었어요. 지선이랑. 막 이렇게 서로 이렇게 주고받는 게 있었는데 무대 위에서 이제 그때 서로의 눈빛을 보고 미안하다. 공연 딱 끝나고 미안했다. 이렇게 해가지고 풀었던 기억이 있습니다. 쉬는 날 한 오후 2시쯤 일어나서 형, 제주도 가자. 바로 찬이 형 숙소 가서 짐을 뭐하러 싸? 이러고 공항 가서 바로 제주도 바다 구경. 배고파 이렇게 회 먹으러 갔다가.
In fact, his voice even sounds more tough when he's imitating IN's Busan dialect, like in this clip.
야 너는 무슨 이게 뭐냐 이게 이걸 왜 들고 다니냐?
뭐야? 이게 왜 있지?
You can hear that kind of intonation in there.
이걸 왜 들고 다니냐?
Okay, before this entire video turns into just me reacting to clips of his voice, there's one more thing I didn't mention about this, and that is how Hyunjin is very well aware of exactly how he sounds, and also how much he struggled because of it during training. In fact, he was almost kicked out of Stray Kids because of his voice. And JYP, Park Jin-young, who's the head of JYP Entertainment, commented at the time that Hyunjin's pronunciation wasn't clear enough and that he couldn't even understand him.
현진이는 랩을 많이 해봤니 안 해봤니?
안 해봤어요.
네가 이제 어떤 막 필 같은 거는 막 내는데 필은 내는데 발음이 안 들려. 들려야지 그래도 글자들이 발음을 빠르고 정확하게 하는 훈련을 굉장히 많이 해야 될 것 같아.
In fact, it was Bangtan actually who helped him to stay in the group and encouraged him to keep trying despite this. And I have a clip of Hyunjin explaining how he wasn't able to get his voice out when they were doing recording. And in this clip, he's also thanking Bangtan for his encouragement and saying that he would have just completely quit right then while recording if it weren't for him.
저는 고마웠던 게 하나 있었어요. 녹음하다가
yes.
이놈의 목소리가 계속 안 나와가지고 막 미치겠는 거야. 막 혼란스럽고 막 녹음실 온 적 한 번도 없거든요. 태어나서 막 이렇게 올라오는 거야. 또 눈물이. 그래서 형 진짜 미안해 하고 진짜 푹 눌러주고 딱 들고 바로 나갔는데 형이 바로 뒤에서 이렇게 괜찮다고 했을 때 진짜 그때 진짜 고마웠어.
나도 그 짧은 순간에 온 생각 다 한편으로 뭔가 되게 오바스러운 행동이었을 것 같다는 생각 들지만 근데 뭔가
누군가 곁에 있어줘야 될 것 같은 느낌이 들어서. 근데 나도 너무나 공감되는 부분이었던 것 같아. 얼마나 답답하고 짜증나고 힘들겠어. 약간 난 녹음이랑 별개로 내 마음을 전달을 못하는 게
그쵸.
얼마나 힘들겠어.
근데 난 그때 형이 잡아주지 않았으면 나 못했을 것 같아. 내 목소리를 모니터링 하는 과정에서. 그래서 진짜 그만둬야겠다. 와 이러고 있었는데 형이 딱 잡아줘서 한 번 더 용기 내서 형이 형 집에서 녹음 받아줘서 그때부터 다시 하자 했어.
And I know this is a video about Hyun-jin, but I really like how Bangtan told him that he completely understood what he was going through and that Hyun-jin must have felt so frustrated to not be able to express himself when singing. And fortunately, Hyun-jin was able to improve his singing voice, and I have a clip of Bangtan asking him that.
요새는 어때? 괜찮아?
좋다가 안 좋다가 계속 이렇게 왔다 갔다 하는 것 같아. 꾸준히 계속 치료하다 보면 무조건 나아요. 저는 안 되는 거 없다고 생각해.
맞아?
He mentions here the word 치료, which means treatment or like therapy. So I can only guess that Hyunjin is getting some sort of voice therapy or maybe just vocal lessons to help him to project his voice. But I'm glad that he was able to improve that and stay in the group. And I also found another clip where he explains part of what actually made it hard for him. And he says that it's difficult for him to put out enough air when he's singing. And that's what it was that he had to practice to get better.
이제 발성 연습하는데 숨이 되게 잘한대. 한 번에 많이 안 쉬어져.
In fact, one of the ways that he improved this was by practicing singing with a pen in his mouth, which I didn't really know was a thing, but I guess it helped.
요즘은 어때 잘 지내? 요즘은 어때 잘 지내? 많이 다투고 얘기를 나눴던 작은 워크룸.
And Changbin was also super helpful to him and gave him advice for how to get more air out when he's singing.
좀 더 약간 윗공간 쓴다 생각해.
약간 느낌 있었어.
코에 봐요. 코에 걸려야 돼. 이게 비성이 발성이거든. 이거야.
야! 복귀란 말들이 내 길을 때려가며 절망감은 커져가 희망이 난 하늘을 주변 사람의 손으로 가린다.
훨씬 낫지 않냐?
Also, Han was helpful giving him advice too while they were recording in the studio.
예스, 완전 좋은데 그 바쁠 듯해 하고 그동안 넘어가는 곳에서 박자가 약간 이상했거든?
오케이.
그쪽만 신경 써주셔야죠.
삐뚤어진 듯 반듯해.
좋은데? 완전한데?
You know what's really awesome is that everyone in the group knew exactly what he was struggling with and were supportive the entire time. And then they kept telling him that he could do it and were even coaching him. So I think that Hyunjin was really in the perfect environment to really improve himself and polish his skills and come out better on the other side. And I think they're all very lucky to have each other. Okay, next let's talk briefly about Hyunjin's usage of filler words. Now, he doesn't actually use that many filler words, but he does have a few that he likes. So here's a video of the first filler word and see if you can figure out what it is.
그러니까 우리가 막 눈에 안 보이면 막 걱정돼가지고.
그렇지.
그런 게 아닐까.
앞에 있으면 뒤가 안 보이잖아. 얼마나 걱정돼.
뒤에 막 한 명만 걸어간다고 생각해 막 찬이 형 성격에 막 이게 뭐 하고 있지? 이럴 것 같아.
I heard him use the word 막 in this clip a total of 6 times, but normally he's not using it that much though. And we've seen other members as well use 막, but it means like or just, and it doesn't really have any strong meaning, but it's pretty common in everyday speech. I'd say generally most people use it, and I recommend that you learn it too, even if you don't want to use it just because you're going to hear it. However, 막 has a little bit of a casual feeling to it, so while it's okay to use in most situations and with friends, I wouldn't recommend writing it on your Korean test or saying it to your teacher.
근데 그때 막 팬데믹도 있고. 아, 그쵸. 우리 그때 막 이거 전투 어때?
이거 할만하다 이거.
근데 이거 엄청 많이 떴어. 막 우리 집 파워인데.
내가 만들어내고 찾으러 가고 막 그래야 되는데.
Okay, the next filler word he likes to use is another one that you'll hear used mostly by younger people, so try to see if you can find it yourself in this next clip.
되게 다양한 걸 시도를 해봤거든요. 그래서 되게
He uses it twice in this clip, but the word is 되게, and it means really or very. And it's useful for adding emphasis, even more than saying like 진짜, for example. And 되게 also has a little bit of a casual feeling, so feel free to use it, just don't write it on your essay. In fact, I would say don't use any filler words in an essay. That should probably be obvious though. Okay, and last but not least, here's one more filler word I found that he likes to use, and this one's much quieter, so you might have to listen very closely to even hear it.
라면은 뭐 사실 뭐 새로 꽂혀있기보다는 항상 꽂혀있죠. 최근에 꽂힌 음식? 뭐 최근에 뭐 새로운 걸 먹어본 적이 있는데.
This filler word is 뭐, which we also heard Lino using a lot, and it means what. But it's used whenever you don't know what to say, and you can simply translate it as like. Okay, so that's enough about his filler words, but before we go, I want to take a quick look at his handwriting as well. And for him, I have two examples, and the first example is a note that he wrote to Felix.
앞으로도 계속 이렇게 빛나주렴. 고맙다.
I read a comment online that they felt Hyunjin had the messiest writing in the group, and I can't disagree that his writing is definitely the hardest to read. It's not that messy. This is actually pretty standard for Korean cursive, and Hyunjin also puts a bit of his own style into it. First, he writes quickly, so I think that might be why some people feel it's really difficult to read. But what happens when someone writes quickly is that some of the letters will get connected together, which can make them harder to read unless you're really familiar with Korean stroke order, which is the order in which the letters are written. For example, look at where he writes 이것 저것 and where he wrote the word 것. Both times he connected it, well, all three of those letters together. And this is only a problem if you're a brand new beginning Korean learner, since you're still learning what stroke order is, and mastering that will take some practice. Now, native Korean speakers already mastered this, so there's not going to be any problem for them to read this letter. But yeah, it could be if you're still a learner. And some parts of his letter are a bit unbalanced, but I think it might have been him kind of getting used to writing vertically on the board with his arms stretched out, like I could see in the video. Especially you could see that in the first sentence where he wrote 안녕. And you can see those two syllables are much wider than the rest of the syllables in this letter. In fact, in the next letter that we're going to look at, the next note, it's the exact same thing for his top sentence. So I really think it's just because he was holding his arm out for this. He also stretches out a lot of his vowels, like where he writes 용보가, which means Felix. The vowel a is stretched vertically, which is kind of a common thing to do. I mentioned before in cursive. And my favorite example of that here is where he writes 가득한. The vowel in ka is stretched vertically, and the next syllable tuk is stretched horizontally. And he doesn't do this everywhere, but most of the time he does. And I think it looks really cool. And let's just look at one more note. This time he wrote a note to Han and see if there's anything else we can learn. Pardon the light there, that's just how it appears in the show, but we can still read it anyway. Now, this one I can tell he wrote it a bit more quickly than the other one, since some of his letters are more incomplete. Like in the first sentence he writes 참 많이도 다투고 울고 웃고, meaning we fought a lot and cried and laughed. And notice how he wrote the consonant tiat, the T letter, in the word 다투다, in the middle one, tu. Normally you would draw a horizontal line in the middle, but he skipped that part and just wrote a little dot instead. And then in the next word, 울고, he drew the consonant iung, which is the circle letter, kind of like a C. So he left it completely open, and he does that a few places here in this letter. And I'm going to say that probably because he had a lot that he wanted to say, and maybe they didn't give him that much time to write it all, since this note is a bit longer than most of the other notes that they'll show at the end of this series. So that could just be the reason why. As for what he wrote, actually, it's very sweet, both this note and the last one. In this one, he's saying how proud he is to have a friend like Han, and then he compliments his humor and his music, and he says how happy he is to be on the same team. And then he ends the letter with the classic 사랑한다. This is like a classic and very tough sounding way of saying, I love you. Kind of like, love you, bro. And he also did that in the previous letter too, which he ended by saying 고맙다, which means thank you, but it has the nuance of kind of like that, like thanks, bro. So while he sounds tough and he writes tough, deep down you can tell he really cares about and appreciates his brothers. I mean, he's also not too shy to tell them how he really feels, which I think is really sweet. And okay, I could keep going on, of course, but there are still 4 more members to analyze, so that's enough for today. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe to my channel for more content just like this. Thank you again to my Patreon supporters as well as my YouTube channel members for making this series possible. And please check out my Patreon page in the video description if you would like to support my channel. You can also get some cool benefits like Korean cheat sheets, study guides, vocabulary decks, and a lot more. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you again in the next episode. 그럼 다음에 또 봐!